Well, good morning, everybody. I just wanted to start this conversation before Felicia starts up, giving you the report, the annual report of our financial performance for 2019. As has been our experience in years past, we have had another very good year. But we've had another very good year because of the hard work of all of our staff and everyone who works together to just watch our pennies, our dollars, make sure we make good decisions and that we are planning ahead and making sure that everything is as it should be for our well-being for the future as well as for today. I'm going to turn this over to Felicia in a minute. And I just want to thank all of you for having been patient with us in those many times when we have had to say no, when we might have wanted us to say yes. So, Felicia, it's up to you.
Hello, everyone. Unfortunately, I feel bad we don't get to meet in person, but I still was anxious to do this annual report to all of you. As I said, we do this after we complete the audit, and we will email you this presentation. Folks that don't have email, we'll put a copy in your box. If you have questions, as always, you're welcome to call me with anything. The audit went, as typically done, very smoothly. We used the same auditors as we have used for probably about 8 or 9 years, Clifton Larson Allen. They are located in Pennsylvania, and they are top-notch and very into the field of healthcare. They do a lot of audits. We had an unqualified opinion for the audit, which is what you want to have. No material weaknesses in internal control, so that was wonderful. In this presentation, I'm going to go over the balance sheet, the P&L statement, the statement of operations. We'll look at our change in net assets, which is the same in a company that has profits, which would be your change in equity. We'll look at a few ratios that are important, our equity section, net assets, look at occupancy, capital expenditures, the things that we spent in 2019. So our first slide is our balance sheet. And if you remember, the balance sheet is reflective of assets, things that Kendal at Lexington owns, the liability, who we owe that to, and the equity we have in the corporation as of one day, December 31st, which is the end of our calendar year. Current assets, if you look comparing 18 to 19, our current assets went up. Those current assets consist of our operating cash, accounts receivable, any billing that we do to residents, insurance companies, Medicaid, Medicare. Also consist of entrance fees, those promissory notes that we have folks when they move in, if they need a little assistance before they come, that can be in that number also, and contributions receivable. It increased during the year. The increase consisted of about $150,000 in accounts receivable. Our cash was up, operating cash about $100,000. Entrance fee receivable about $100,000 also. You're going to see that wasn't as much a change. The next line we look at is our investments, and this is our unrestricted investments. Went up by, you can see, about $12 million. That is huge. Couple different reasons. If you remember, we'll see this more in the P&L statement, that investments really declined at the end of 18. We had an unrealized loss. They came back in January, so that was one reason, and we finished 2019 with large, over $2 million, I think $2.2 million in unrealized gains. In addition, we had folks move in for Sunrise Ridge, and we had other folks moving in. So those entrance fees we received, so when someone occupies their apartment, they move in, those are deemed unrestricted. So that was really the main jump in those entrance fee receipts. Restricted cash, there's a large decrease there from about almost 26 million to 8 million. That had to do with using those funds we got as the bond proceeds for construction. That was the vast majority of that. Net property, plant, and equipment. There again, when we purchase things, they're capitalized, and then we recognize that expense over time. Equipment might be recognized and expensed over 7 years. Buildings, it's going to be more like 40 years. So that increase from 42 million to 58, almost 59, consists of basically the Sunrise Ridge cottages, the construction in both health centers and the renovations that we do to the existing apartments and cottages. Other assets really are a couple different things. Consists of our investment in health insurance. And what that is, if you remember, we are self-insured for health insurance through the Kendal Corporation, and we have an investment in there. That declined during the year. We were given a refund, and you're going to see part of that refund that was given to us was because the investments in that self-insurance and our experience was so good. That refund, part of it gets to stay with Kendal at Lexington. Part of that was attributed to employee contributions. So we gave that back to employees as required by the government in the form of what we called health insurance holidays. And so we'll see our health insurance being over budget, but that was because of the refund. So total assets on a whole, if you look at it, went up $12.8 million, almost 14%. Turning to page 4, we've got our liabilities. Current liabilities increased from 18 to 19 by $2 million. That consisted of basically the amount that we owed for Nielsen. It's considered current. And at the end of December, we had not paid their payment application from November and December. We also had an entrance fee refund for a resident that passed away, and that had to be refunded once we resell the cottage, and that was about $500,000. Entrance fees and deposits increasing $8 million. What that represents is a liability for all the entrance fees that we receive from all the residents that stays on the books, and then a little bit of that every year is then transferred from liabilities, and we are able to recognize that as revenue. Well, there again, we had all these folks move in for Sunrise Ridge and all the new people that came in. Those are a liability, and year after year, we will slowly recognize that revenue. Long-term debt decreased. There again, we have not incurred any additional debt. I don't anticipate incurring any additional debt shortly. So that continues to decline as we make payments on that principal. And then net assets, really our equity section, increased by, you can see, almost $4 million, and that's because we had such a wonderful year, and you're going to see that when we look at our statement of operations. Page 3, we look at the revenue for our statement of operations. If we look at the bottom line before we look at the individuals, it increased by over $4 million, 28.4%. First line is there, the residential fees. That is our independent living revenue, increased by 6.4%. There again, folks for Sunrise Ridge started moving in September. That was part of it. You'll see that increase even more so going forward into 2020. If we look at health center fees, there was a decrease about 1% of the health center fees. Health center fees consist of both assisted living and the Borden Center. Webster Center revenue decreased by $111,000 because of the decline in the number of beds. Typically, we would have 17. I think last year we averaged more like 14 or 15. Also within health center fees is the Borden Center. Now, the Borden Center revenue from 2018 to 2019 increased by only $53,000, 1.1%. But that payer mix is really what drove that. While we had less bed occupied, we had a lot more folks that were here on Part A stays where the Medicare Part A was paying for it. That increased from $591,000 to $1.2 million, a 103% increase. Part B revenue for outpatient therapy, that decreased by $243,000. And as some of our Medicaid residents had passed away, Medicaid revenue decreased by almost 35%, being $440,000. After our health center fees, we see entrance fee amortization. As you remember, that's a non-cash item. But what that is that's the revenue that we recognize each year related to the entrance fees for all the revenues, for all the residents that have moved into the community. The large increase is the result of the number of deaths that we had. Also reflects folks that are here, but that stays fairly constant. So we did have the increase of the Sunrise Ridge residents, but we had 15 people that passed away. And if somebody passes away, all their entrance fee that had not been recognized is then recognized upon their passing. Investment income is the revenue item that changed the most from 18 to 19. You see that loss in 18, and that's because we had an unrealized loss of $1.1 million. The end of 18, the market had really declined. in addition to the $1.1 million in unrealized loss for 18, we did have interest and dividend income of about $435,000. That was similar to the interest and dividend income in 2019, which was $733,000. But what we had in 19 was at the end of the year, we had an unrealized gains on our investments of $2.3 million. Other income consists of Sunnyside revenue, medical supplies that we might bill the residents for, dining revenue, all those type of odd things. The reason for the decrease is a little bit of, dining revenue decreased $14,000, Sunnyside revenue decreased by $8,000. But what's included in there is the loss on some fixed assets, furniture, equipment, items that had not been fully depreciated, but that we had gotten rid of at in the Webster, the board and center furnishings, all of that. So instead of being reflected in the total expenses, though that net loss is there reflected in that other income line. So as I mentioned before, gross revenue increased by $4 million, 28%. And you'll see on page 6, we have a graph there, pie chart, I should say, and just want to point out that residential fees and then health center fees used to be neck and neck, almost the same amount. You'll see with adding Sunrise Ridge Cottages, we're receiving more revenue for IL apartments and cottages. The decrease in the health center fees was because of occupancy, but I think even going forward, we will see that residential revenue is going to be exceeding health center revenue. Going on to page 7 on expenses, we look at the bottom line. Expenses increased almost exactly $1 million or 6.9%. Changes within those categories. If we look at administrative expenses consist of any expenses related to IT, human resources, marketing, philanthropy, and bad debts included in there. So we had an increase of $80,000, but 43 of that had to do with wages for those individuals. But in the individual departments, we see an increase. IT increased by $48,000. That consisted of a lot of the licenses on the equipment and the software that we have. HR, human resources, increased by $94,000. $81,000 of that was for most of the expenses related to the executive search for Mina's replacement. Marketing declined by $90,000. The reason for that is because in 2018, the accounting rules had changed and we had to expense many of the, or basically all of the expenses related to the phase 3 expansion for the cottages. We used to be able to capitalize those, amortize them over time, and that changed. So 2018 took a hit. Also within general administration is our insurance. Our insurance premiums increased by $15,000. What we did see a large decrease of was our bad debt allowance because our receivables had declined some, or they weren't aged as much. We did see favorable of our bad debt allowance. That will change then in 2020. Housekeeping increase of $34,000 was all of that consisted of wages and some contracted services for other staff. So all of that increase was wages. Maintenance increased to $177,000. $48,000 of that was wages. Also, we saw other categories within maintenance. We had major repairs, if you remember, on the bus. So those vehicles repairs increased by $10,000. Painting of individual residences upon reoccupied, where it wasn't a total renovation, that was an increase of $25,000. Repairs to the HVAC system was $36,000. Various repairs and maintenance and supplies for that, $30,000 increase. And then the resident alarm system and all related to that, and the fire alarm system was $28,000. Much of that had to do with the lightning strikes we had. I think we had 5 or 6 incidents last year, totally $111,000. We were able to collect $70,000 from the insurance company, but we had a deductible of $10,000, so we only collected about $41,000 that we had to cover ourselves. Some of it reflective here, but a lot of it was capital items. If we look at dining services, $156,000 increase, $69,000 of that was wages. $60,000 of it consisted of the increase in food costs, and other items in there that increased were linens, paper products. We did see a decrease in janitorial and cleaning supplies. Health insurance, health services is not only Webster and Borden, but it's the fitness center, it's the clinic, it is therapy. And the the increase in health services expenses of $64,000 really was all attributable to therapy. We had a decrease by $76,000, not providing as much Part B therapy. Wages in the health services area increased by $105,000. So despite not having as many beds online, we decided and we made the conscientious decision not to decrease staffing at all. So that was a positive move. Employee benefits increased by $203,000. As I had mentioned before, we received from our health insurance consortium a refund. The refund is not reflected in revenue at all. It's reflected in that decrease in that asset on the balance sheet. So when a portion of that refund is attributed to Kendal, a portion of that's attributed to the employees. So we had to refund that, and we did that in the way of what we called a health insurance holiday. For 5 pay periods, we had done that for the employees. So health insurance was about $255,000 increase from 2018. We did not have to make a contribution to our legacy, our pension defined benefit plan. It was fully funded at 19, no contribution there. 2020, we will have to make a contribution. We did see also a decrease in our workers' comp insurance, so that was wonderful. Utilities, all the things that you might think of. Gas and electric decreased from 18 by $20,000. The only $5,000 increase, but that consisted of both water and cable. Those increased from the year before. Real estate taxes, the increase of $52,000 was all from the city of Lexington for the assessment with the new cottages. Next, interest expense. This is an item that is going to even change more dramatically in 2020 and in 2021. In 2018, that was the interest associated with our 2016 bonds. Our 2017 bond interest, the vast majority of that was capitalized. It had to do with the project, and those are the accounting rules. Not until we started bringing on some of Sunrise Ridge cottages in September was that transferred to expense. So in 2020, as we complete all the projects, all the renovations, more will be expensed, and then we'll expect in 2021 that interest expense will probably be in the neighborhood of about $1.6 million. Affiliation fee is what we pay the Kendal Corporation. It's based on budgeted expenses. So as our expenses increased in the budget, that's why that fee increased. And depreciation, you're seeing as we put new assets in service, and we started with those, some of the cottages starting in September, there's an increase in that depreciation. There again, that's a non-cash item. So just to repeat, operating expenses did increase for the year. And if we look at the pie chart on page 8, it's set up a little different than the expenses. What I do here is I segregate the wages and the benefits so we can see. For 2019, if we add together employee benefits and wages, that's 48% of the entire pie of all the expenses. In 2018, it was 47.8, so just a very small increase percentage-wise. Other categories, very similar expenses from year to year. Looking at page 9, this is really where we landed at the end of the year. Column furthest to the right is our gain from operations. What did we do financially? Large increase from the year before, but there again, if you remember, the vast majority of that had to do with our over $2 million in unrealized gains from the year. But increase in net assets of $3.7 million, and on tune to where we were in 2017. This is wonderful. If you remember when we were looking at doing our project for the expansion and the renovations, we knew we might have a couple tough years, and really that did not materialize in 2019. 2020 may be a different story, especially with the pandemic, but we can celebrate where we landed in 2019. If we go to page 10, this is one of our most important, or really our most important ratio that we need to look at. We have, because we borrow this money, we have these bonds, we have to follow the bond covenants. And this ratio here, which is prescribed in the bond documents, has to be met only on the last day of the year at 12/31. The requirement is a 1.2 ratio. We had 2.02. If you see that maximum annual debt service of a little over $2 million, that is based on our existing $120 apartments and cottages. That number will change starting in 2021, when all of the units are on board, the 150 units. That denominator in this calculation will go over to $3 million. So it's going to be a little bit tougher to make, but we made it. If we look at page 11, our operating ratio. Now, you always think, oh, most ratios you want to be higher. This is our ratio where the lower, the better. And what it represents is revenue and expenses. So we had lower revenue in 2019 than we had in the past because we took things off board, and our expenses stayed about constant or increased a little bit. So there again, we had a fabulous year in 17, 18, 19, we have this construction going on, we have less revenue. So I expect, because of the delays, we'll still see this not be where we want it to be in 2020, but we expected this. 2021 is where hopefully that will definitely improve, and I'm optimistic that it will. Page 12, days cash on hand. And what that tells us is how much cash do we have? Unrestricted cash, not that's restricted according to the bond documents or donor restrictions. But what do we have to cover our average daily expenses? 917 days. That's huge. This is very almost misleading, because as all the cottages came on board and we received those entrance fees, once we get those, they're considered unrestricted. But the extra entrance fees that we received are going to be used to pay those construction costs. I did not borrow. Kendal at Lexington made the conscious decision to not borrow on our 2017 B bonds. We thought we've got this unrestricted cash here, we will use that. So I've done a calculation. I finished up the March of 2020 financial statements. Cash was still high, but I kind of did a look to see that if we had paid off all of our construction costs, where would our days cash on hand fall at the end of March? And that's declined to 558 days, so big decrease, but still extremely very healthy. Now we're looking at the accounting literature changed in 2018. Now we look at our equity section, our net asset section, in two pieces. What's restricted by donors and what is unrestricted. Even if something's considered board designated, it's deemed unrestricted or without donor restrictions. So you'll see that our donor restrictions at the end of the year increased to $2.9 million. The vast majority of that, well, first of all, the largest category is the fellowship fund. And you'll see we did have some releases. We did have some folks that were on the fellowship fund. So that money is going to a good cause. The, what is that? The fourth line down, the capital campaign, $1.3 million. That we decided as a finance committee and a board not to release those until the project was completed. So in 2020, we will release all those donor funds. Next, we look at page 14. This is our board designated funds. So really, the board can always change that, but we've got quite a few items there. There again, the largest piece on that page is the second line down with the capital replacement plan. The board and the finance committee had made a recommendation to add another $500,000 to that, and that's when we need replacements of the boilers, the roofs, anything. So $2 million. These various accounts, and I should have pointed on the other page, also get the benefit if we have any investment gains. If it's a long-term fund, like the fellowship fund, the capital replacement fund, we do allocate investment in gains and losses. The other large piece in this is we've got for the phase 3, the Webster Board and Gardens, whatever we use. And what these were is we did receive a couple contributions from residents that were not donor restricted. The residents did not restrict those, but the board decided to use that extra funds towards the project. So there again, there will be a release of those in 2020, as it with the executive search will, whatever funds are not used, that will be released. So that was there was an increase of 2.6 million to 3.4 million. We go to page 15, we look at occupancy. As we always mention, occupancy is the biggest driver in our industry. Saw a little bit of a decrease in residential living from 18 to 19 as we had more units. Assisted living, a decrease, but we knew that was going to happen. But with the delays, it was actually higher than we had budgeted for assisted living. And the same thing with the board and center, 83%, a decrease to 76%. Next item, we look at page 16, and this is our capital expenditures of almost $590,000. We did not spend as much as we thought we would. Of this $587,000, $134 of that was in our contingency fund. So the largest piece, which typically happens every year, is the renovations to apartments and cottages as there's turnovers. Computer hardware and software, another large piece. Over half of that consisted of the cabling that we needed for more of the infrastructure for the internet service. That fiber optic is part of it. Also within that computer equipment, we have switches and routers and computers, both laptops and desktops, and we purchased some kind of expensive battery backups after those storms that we hope will help with that. And there again, this is, if we received any insurance proceeds, that's not reflected in here. We did capitalize the gross amounts. Vehicles, we've got 4 different items that were there. A housekeeping van. Herbie was able to get a 2016 Ford pickup, a 2018 Dodge Caravan, and a golf cart. So stuff that we needed. Miscellaneous maintenance equipment consisted of pull cords, wireless pull cords in the boarding center, a 0-turn mower, a pool heater, outdoor benches, and some other smaller equipment for maintenance folks. Health services continued, $21,000 of a lift and mattresses, and the big piece there, not quite half, was a blanket warmer. And I don't know about you, but if I ever need one of those blanket warmers, those are wonderful. Dining services, equipment and renovations. In dining, there was ice maker, disposal, tabletop fridge, and we also, which has not been complete, but there's some ventilation where the kitchen was really, really hot, and Herbie's been working on that. Now that the weather's warmed up, they'll be able to complete that. But part of that $12,000, about $5,000 of that was to work on the ventilation. Renovations to the beauty shop and the front office. The beauty shop's complete. We were able to do that for under $2,000. The front office, the administrative area, we have not completed that. And I think the major pieces, we want to do painting and replace the carpeting, which really needs it. And then the last piece is the site plan. We've been having Spectrum also do some master planning for us, and that's something the board had done. So there again, we spend a lot less than we thought we would spend, but there was lots going on in 2019. And then just kind of a quick update for 2020. Occupancy, where we are through the month of March. Above budget in residential living, which is wonderful. Assisted living, we're above budget, and skilled, we're below budget. Now, both of those, it's kind of good. It would be nice if we were maybe below budget in assisted living, in that means more of the construction was happening, but we've been able to keep those beds occupied. Nursing, there again, and some of this we're going to see even different as we come into April, because the pandemic and everything that we recognize is really barely reflective in the month of March, but we are still taking admissions, so hopefully that can continue. Our operating gain at the end of March for the first quarter was, there again, $247,000, wonderful, but we will be seeing much different as we move into the second and third quarter of 2020. Thank you very much. If, like I said, I will have Becky email this presentation to everyone. I will make hard copies for folks that don't have emails. Call with any questions to my office. And then I didn't bring a copy with me, but the final audit is, I always file a copy in the resident library. It's been moved. It's over where the periodicals, the magazines are, but there's a folder, or excuse me, a 3-ring binder that includes not only the full entire audit, also includes a copy of our IRS tax return, the 990. That's not available. I expect that by the end of May. It hasn't been filed yet, and I'm expecting a draft from the auditors next week. And then also the annual disclosure statement that we file with the State Corporation Commission Bureau of Insurance. So any of those documents are open for your review, and feel free to call me because I love to talk about that. So thanks much. Stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.